From the Lean Enterprise Institute in Boston, this is the WLEI Podcast, where we share stories of people making the world better through lean thinking and practice. For more information about LEI, including how we can help you apply lean thinking, please visit lean.org.
Hello and welcome to the WLEI Podcast. Today we're talking with Phil Green. Phil has worked at the Harvard Innovation Lab, also known as the iLab, for 5 years, where he is the senior advisor for B2B and technology. He's also been an angel investor for over 10 years. Before the iLab, Phil spent over 30 years working at various startups where he was CEO, COO, CTO, and a product manager. So he's worn a lot of hats and seen his share of good, bad, and ugly startup principles put into practice. Hi, Phil. Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing?
Good. I'm really excited to talk with you about product-centered entrepreneurship. I know a bit about your work, but there's certainly more to learn, and it's a delight to have you on the podcast today. First, I'd love to hear more about your work at Harvard Innovation Labs and what excites you about the kinds of products and services you're seeing these days from entrepreneurs.
Well, so one of the things I find really fun about working at the Harvard Innovation Lab is, unlike a lot of innovation labs, we work with all 13 schools. So we see, kind of ideas and ventures being started by undergraduates, by business school students, by, the design school students, engineers, medical school students, lawyers, public policy folks. So it's just a ton of fun. And so the kinds of things that are really interesting, some of the most interesting things come out of the ed school. Education got broken completely during COVID, right? Butts in seats was the model. You couldn't do that during COVID. Everybody went home, right? So suddenly they were innovating like crazy. So some of the neatest things that we see are coming out of that because they're continuing to innovate. Even though we've come back to in-classroom teaching, the innovation has not stopped there at all. So we see tons of stuff. And what's really fun is some of the students are trying to change the world. Others are trying to just make a lot of money, so it's just a huge variety of really interesting projects that are incredibly innovative. The kids, the students are super passionate. So it's just a blast to see everything and to just experience it. So it's just a great place to work.
Can you tell me a bit more about your role?
Yeah, so what we have at the Innovation Lab is we have 4 advisors. One is B2B, that's myself. So if you're selling to businesses or governments or any organization, really, just not a person, that's B2B. I'm the B2B advisor. And then there's a B2C advisor. So if you're selling to consumers, we have that. And then we have a health and life sciences advisor. So you're doing medical work, selling, those sorts of things, doing any kind of medical innovations. And then we have the social impact advisor. And so we're here full time, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And we work with the students all day long. And then there's a huge staff that is involved in helping us run events, doing marketing to the students, doing all sorts of other things. But the 4 advisors we basically spend about 60% of our time in one-on-one meetings with the students. So I'm typically in, anywhere from kind of a light day is 4, a heavy day, 10 meetings with students throughout the day.
A true advisor. I love that. Well, I can't talk to you about product-centered entrepreneurship without talking about MVPs. Coming up in the lean community and doing a lot of work to connect the lean startup and the more traditional lean thinking and practice community, I've been sort of fascinated by how Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup, came out. I know it's been a while now, but it's such a popular book and helpful book to so many entrepreneurs. There's a lot of emphasis on this idea of the minimum viable product still. And one of the core principles of lean product and process development, however, is understand before you execute. In other words, it's not quite enough to have a great idea and just start trying to create that MVP. Folks need to truly understand what the product needs to be first. And part of the way you do this is by listening super closely to customers, right? So can you speak a bit about how you've seen this learning play out around MVPs with entrepreneurs that you mentor and where people are struggling or making progress in this area, getting to that MVP, but also understanding before you execute?
Yeah, I think one of the core things that we believe at the Innovation Lab is that we're focused with, in particular, students on really the first 4 steps of their journey, right? It's nice to have an entrepreneurial class where you're teaching 45 steps to entrepreneurship and branding and all sorts of other things. But at the end of the day, really getting your venture started boils down to kind of 4 steps: having an idea, and then doing what we consider to be customer discovery or demand validation, then building the MVP, and then working closely with getting your first set of customers. It's really that simple a process. And if you boil it down to those four things, then you can really help the students kind of do that. We don't work too much on the ideation, although there's several things we do in the ideation area. But once you have an idea, then the next thing is really talking very closely with customers and understanding them before you go off and build an MVP. And the worst is when you build a non-MVP, you build a really heavy version of your product before you talk to customers, because then you usually run into a lot of trouble that you've built the wrong thing. Because that is what I say to students all the time is nobody's perfect. So your idea is not going to be perfect. What's really important is to engage with those customers and understand their pain points and not get wedded to your idea. So one of the things that I see with the students and people who start ventures is they get an idea, kind of strikes them like a lightning bolt hits them in the shower or wherever they are. And suddenly it's, oh my God, I've got this great idea. And what tends to happen when you have the kind of lightning bolt that hits you is the problem is you hold on to it. Your ego gets really attached to the idea. And your self-worth now suddenly is, I've got to prove my ideas right versus what does the customer really want? And so you have to divorce yourself from your idea. You have to distance yourself from that and think about it as an assumption. That needs to be tested, right? And you have to test that by talking to folks and then eventually building an MVP to test that further and further and further, eventually asking them to buy it from you. And that's the ultimate test. But it's really those three steps, right? Talking to folks, building something light and getting more feedback, and then building something maybe a little heavier and getting them to buy it is what you're looking to do. And if you can follow that very straightforward process, you're likely to have a lot more luck than really holding really, really tightly to your idea and trying to prove everybody wrong that your idea doesn't work. Or, you get these phrases, nobody understands my product. Well, you don't understand the customer is the much more likely.
Yeah, it's almost clinical, isn't it? I feel like one of the power of lean thinking and practice is there's the sort of, you put your scientist hat on and you really try to stay clinical about it. And while that can be frustrating sometimes, there's also enormous relief in that.
100%. And it really is that whole idea of understanding that everything is an assumption until somebody's willing to pay for it, right?
Yeah.
It's and everything. And so you have to really think about it that way. And if you don't think about it that way, it's a tough road.
Yeah. Well, I've heard you talk about minimum valuable process when you talk about MVP, which I think is really fabulous for so many reasons I probably don't have to go into. Can you tell me about how you teach that to students?
Yeah. So, I love the work that Eric did, and I teach MVP all the time, but I don't like minimal viable product. And because I don't think that's what is really meant by this whole thing. Minimal 100%, right? Don't do a ton of work. I think there's no agreement, there's no disagreement there. The key thing is minimal means do as little work as possible for the maximum number of learnings. And that's what you're trying to do in any kind of MVP process. Viable, I have issues with, right? And some people do diagrams where they say, oh, if you're going to build a car, well, first you build a skateboard, and then you build a bike, and then eventually you build a car. And people think that makes sense rather than a car without wheels or something. The problem is that if your customer is, let's just say, a mom with 4 kids, the skateboard really doesn't do very much good. It doesn't provide any value, right? Oh, but it's transportation. But she needs way more than transportation, right? So I think valuable makes it more pointed. It's got to be valuable to the customer. If it doesn't touch on the value the customer is really trying to achieve, then you're not testing, what you're attempting to sell to them eventually. So I think valuable is a more pointed way to get across what you've got to be testing here. Is there value that the customer is going to derive from this thing? And then product, in fact, Eric himself said that, look, it's not about product. It's about a process. It's about a lot of iterations. And often what he would say is, his favorite first MVP might even be a waiting list. So it's minimal, right? It finds out if somebody's willing to sign up for something, is it valuable to them? And it's the first step in a process. And you're going to do a whole set of these. So maybe your first MVP is a waiting list. You get a bunch of people to sign up. Then you start to do something else and you iterate on that a whole bunch of times. And eventually you have something that is really not an MVP anymore, but is your first version of your product. And so this is a process. You're going to iterate a lot. One of the phrases that came up at the iLab was the average number of iterations it takes startup before from launch to first version, the people are willing to pay for it, is 50 versions. 50 versions of your product. Now, if you're doing agile in a 2-week sprint, 50 iterations, that's a heck of a lot of weeks. That's almost 2 years, right?
Yeah.
That's not going to work. You don't want to, you can't do that. So it's got to be light. Again, we come back to the minimal piece. It's got to be light. It's got to be something you can iterate on quickly, learn, and then iterate again, learn, iterate again, and get those iterations out of the way as quickly as possible and get as many learnings as you possibly can.
Mm. Well, on that point and keeping things light, I'd love to hear your view about why no code development is so powerful and how this helps people get to a first good MVP.
Yeah, no code is really cool. And I think the other thing now is what kind of no code is almost the old term now. The new term is visual coding and vibe coding. Vibe coding is when you literally use the LLMs to have you write
Did you
code.
say vibe?
Yeah, vibe.
That's cool. That's good. Like, wait, the product has good vibes?
Well, I think it's you're not writing any code. You're just kind of cruising. It's like,
oh, wow. People are learning that I don't know about vibe coding right now in the podcast, but I'm excited about this terminology. Keep going.
Yeah. So the key is that LLMs will now write code for you. And so I started teaching no code about 5 years ago when I came to the iLab. And now the latest thing is also vibe coding. And I think there are a couple of things. You can get, 80% of the way there really, really quickly with vibe coding. It's writing real code, it's producing real stuff. But the question is, you probably need an engineer to finish it off and go from the 80% to the 100%. And so you have to be a little careful of it. I think in relatively short period of time, vibe coding or coding through LLMs and having them do that is going to be amazing. I did a demo a while back. I just asked one of the chat products I said, I want to do a joke of the day product. Please write me this stuff. It wrote me, not complicated, pretty simple stuff, but it went and found an API, built the pages, the web page, etc. Told me I could deploy it in a variety of sites. I said, no. I'd like to deploy it on Amazon, please. Tell me how to do that. Told me how to do that. Told me where to deploy the pages. Told me how to set the security, everything. And then it worked, right? The problem is I said, oh man, I'm at the end of this and the joke doesn't show up when I load the page the first time. I got to hit new joke in order to get the first joke. I said, you got to fix this. I said, oh, yeah. That's because the DOM isn't loaded and you need to fix this. And wrote me a new one of the pages, redeployed that, and whammo, the whole thing worked. So they're getting there, and you can write pretty complicated products with these. But I think the interesting thing is also going to be where in visual coding and vibe coding kind of really intersect. And, the folks like Bubble and Glide and a lot of other these no code products, they're working really hard on this. And the key thing is that then I can have the LLM vibe coding basically get me the 80%. And then maybe I'm going to tweak it visually. And I think that the combination of those two things is going to be super powerful. But the nice thing about whether you want to call it no code, you want to call it visual coding, you want to call it vibe coding, is it gets you there fast. And I've had teams that write an app and take a year and spend very large amounts of money, which is like not the way you want to go with this sort of stuff. And that takes a long time. It's not the way to go. And what no code or vibe coding or visual coding can get you is a really fast MVP. I've had teams that have taken a product built in Bubble and they've raised a Series A, 50 million value, raised 10 million bucks. These products are very capable. These are not toys, right? At some point, you're probably going to convert out of no code, but you can build very, very, robust products that deliver tons of value that people are willing to pay really, really good money for and have a large installed base, thousands of users. And so the key thing is you're not dismissing those as being a toy. These are industrial strength products that have pretty good security. and can do some really nice stuff for you. So I think that the key thing is employing those in your MVP makes a ton of sense. Go fast, learn a lot, and then, eventually you'll probably convert. And everybody gets worried about that. That's the simple part.
Yeah.
Hard part is getting the first one built and learning what people, again, find valuable, understanding what features are important and what features in your head you thought were important, but nobody really cares, at all about. So no code or vibe coding and visual coding really can help you go fast. And that's what's great about them.
Awesome. Well, I know if we zoom out from Harvard Innovation Labs for a moment, I know you have a lot of experience in tech and with lean thinking and practice across various contexts, not only entrepreneurship. I'd love to hear your perspective on the different kinds of challenges you've seen teams having in large distributed organizations versus small startups.
Yeah. So in, big distributed organizations, the biggest thing that I've noticed is keeping the culture the way you want it, right? You can't bring everybody in for a meeting. It's harder to have a celebration where everybody is there and you can kind of talk to everybody and communicate really, really well about all the things they did that were great. People are in their houses and they're banging away on their computers and kind of feeling like they're part of a team is just much, much harder for them to kind of achieve. And so with big distributed organizations, that's hard. I mean, when you have like a development team in one place and you have, kind of the product management, team kind of assembled maybe with more of the organization, that is a little easier. You have a bulk in two places, right? And people need community. Some people like coding all by themselves in their house, and that may work well for them. But I think it's much harder for them to feel like they're really, kind of part of the organization, and for you to push culture into those sorts of things, because you're just not breaking bread with people. You're not having conversations at the water cooler. And there are various products that try to help you do that, but it's just not the same as seeing people in real life. I mean, when it was funny, when I joined the iLab, it was in the middle of COVID, and I had, I interviewed online. I did all of my onboarding online. It was the weirdest experience ever. And when finally everybody got back to the office, it was, just much, much better. And then, the first couple of years, even back in the iLab, their students didn't come down to the iLab as much. Zoom was still much more prevalent. And now we're getting back to what is much more fun, which is you actually meet people, you talk to them face to face, you shake their hands, you hug people when they do great work, when they raise money. It's just much more interesting and much more fun when you can really see people. So the biggest issue I see in distributed organizations is the culture. You can roll product out. You can have developers. You can have an agile meeting. You can have the stand up every day, and everybody gets what they're supposed to do and all those sorts of things. I think that handing out tasks and running development or other things, that's relatively straightforward. But it's getting the team to kind of buy into what you're doing as a mission, and understanding how to imprint your culture on everyone when, they're at the end of the day, they're going down for a ham sandwich in the middle of the day, and, their kids come home, and, it's just a different sort of thing. And it can work really well for companies. But I think getting that culture imprinted and having everyone understand, what that's all about is much, much more difficult in distributed organizations.
Mm. Thank you for your candor. You said a few moments ago, I love this, go fast, learn a lot, right? What a better message than some of the other messages that have been out there in the entrepreneurship circles. I want to kind of tease that out for a moment. In a time of so much change right now, and everybody's very aware of that on so many different fronts, and market demands kind of necessarily are changing all the time and changing fast. So, I think with me for a moment, as we coach folks to go slow enough, particularly product folks and leaders, to go slow enough to truly understand before you execute, I'd love to hear how you balance that with also needing to, like you said, move fast and be super responsive. So maybe just sort of that, kind of industry view. How are you kind of helping folks with this moment that we're in?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, to my mind, it's like, are you reacting to a data point, or are you reacting to data points, right? So if you have, you start talking to customers and everybody hates the way something works in your product, and you have that from a whole bunch of your clients, then you better react fast, right? You have the data you need to move fast. The problem is when one of your biggest clients calls you up and yells you about some feature, what's really important is not the knee-jerk reaction. And because as I always say, you can draw a line any way you want through one data point, and that's the problem. And so when product people don't back up from a data point and say, we need multiple data points here, and we need to understand the whys behind that. Because often what somebody's complaining about is, they don't like the button on the left, but but when you talk to 5 or 6 clients, what you really understand is it's a bigger process problem going on here. It's not about where the button is. It's about how the button works. It's about what kind of workflow people are trying to do. And it's really making sure you understand the why behind what the request is. So many times I was kind of the chief product officer for the company I ran for 15 years. And people would say, I don't need the red button. I need this green button, right? But what you would do is if you talk to multiple clients and understand the whys behind those things, often you find that they're all asking exactly the same thing. There's something deeper down you need to do, and then that'll help everybody. So I think it's really important to not overanalyze things. But at the same time, it's really important to get to the why behind things, because just doing one thing really quickly is often a recipe for disaster. Because particularly if you're listening to one client versus multiple clients, then you do things that one client wants, and it really doesn't work for everybody else. Getting to that underlying reason behind these requests and understanding that across multiple clients can really help you a lot.
Thank you. Okay, last question, but at the Lean Enterprise Institute, we actually have a lot of organizations coming to us now to sort of get the lean foundation under Agile and to understand how Agile and lean thinking and practice work together. And we spend a lot of time coaching with the LPPD learning group how powerful Agile is when it has that foundation of lean thinking and practice. And sometimes those communities aren't super connected. So I'd love to hear how you work with Agile folks to learn core lean principles.
What I find so funny is that there's this kind of people think they're two different things. And I've worked with lots of organizations who think that Agile makes you go slow. And I couldn't disagree more. I think Agile makes you go much, much faster. And I think the most important thing, the whole reason it's called Agile is, yes, you do sprint planning. Yes, you try to nail down what you're going to do in 2 weeks. Yes, you then try to execute against that. But the whole point of Agile is if somebody comes in and says, excuse me, there's something more important here and we got to switch gears, you can do that, okay? And that's what's critical about it, that you can, in fact, switch gears. We didn't like the idea of releasing continuously. That didn't work for us, didn't work for our customers. They didn't want to get a release every 10 weeks. And it meant we couldn't tell them what was new about the product, because you're doing lots and lots of little features. Nobody really, kind of wanted to think about it that way. So we would do a bigger release every 6 months. One of the core principles of Agile is you are ready to ship in 2 weeks. So you could put it in the bag, release something maybe in 3 months rather than the normal 6-month thing. But that's fine. You do the final QA cycle, you push it out the door, everybody gets happy, or you say, oops, we're going to do this. We're going to delay the other 4 features we were going to do to get the thing out. We're going to do 2 other features that have now become unbelievably important. You switch around, then you release the product and you're out the door. So to me, moving fast, I mean, look, I worked at Microsoft on Word for Windows, and we built WordPad in the summer. And then it took like 3 years for Word for Windows to actually ship. And that's because they didn't integrate QA into it. The way to slow things down, the way to go slow is not to follow Agile. And that's in fact why everybody now has moved away from waterfall, not integrating QA, not having things well planned out, not planning these things, not keeping the product ready to ship at any time. If you can do that, you can move way, way faster than if you're jerking around and adding things and you think you're being fast, but you're being slow. And so to my mind, Agile is the way to go fast. I don't understand the differences between that. And people who tend to say, oh, Agile just is, there's so much overhead, it makes you go slow. I don't think they understand how to use Agile. I don't think they've used it well. There are lots of people who, to my mind, run waterfall with a stand-up every morning, and they call that Agile. That's not Agile.
Yeah.
stand up is one of the ceremonies that you've got to do to make Agile work. And there are a bunch of others. I think the
Yeah.
most important is always remain shippable. That is a core principle that most people don't get, which means you can ship at any time. That's fast. And if you can keep it that way, because having a technical backlog in your own development cycle, that's exactly how you go slow. Keep the product ready to go, add features whenever you need to, release whenever you need to. That allows you to go really, really, really quickly. And the transparency that you have with Agile is also mind-boggling. You know who's working on what, when they're going to finish things, when people have problems with things, you can switch things around. It's a marvelous thing to go fast. It is not something that helps you go slow at all.
Yeah. Well, those core principles, right? I mean, I think, like you said, versus running through the motions with Agile and calling that Agile and understanding what the core principles are and keeping that focus squarely on value and what you said about product development being a team sport. Well, thank you so much for your time. Are there any final thoughts you'd share with people kind of as we think about product-centered entrepreneurship for these times?
Look, I think there's so many ideas out there, and AI is changing everything, right? And so, with the advent of AI, you could go even faster. You can do things you couldn't do before. So the world is your oyster. Starting something, go fast, make your customers happy. It's a really fun and exciting time.
Thanks so much, Phil. Take care.
All right, take care. Thank you.